Today, we have Boomer Anderson on the Made to Thrive show, and what an honor and what a privilege it is to have a man who I've been listening to for a very long time. I think he's got 170 episodes on Decoding Superhuman. I sometimes finish the episode and I said to my wife, I've learned so much in the last hour. It's incredible. He has an ability to listen. He has an ability to ask powerful questions and wait for people to respond. And without knowing Boomer Anderson, I've got to know him through his podcast, that he's a man of integrity and honesty. I reached out and he responded. So welcome to the show, Boomer Anderson.
You're making me blush, Steve. This is just an amazing introduction. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, well, it's a real privilege to have you. And I've even learned how to ask questions, although I feel like an intern, 17 shows in. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to learn from the people that have gone before you. So you're one of those people that I definitely listen to every single week. I do want to unpack your story. You've got the most incredible narrative. Tell me about your story and heart disease and what happened as you traveled the world, changing financial markets and chasing a dream. Tell the listeners about your story.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in the sense that I've been obsessed with this idea of performance since I was really young. That manifested itself in terms of athletics or academics. I was really trying to just push it to the next level, right? You go to university, study real hard. I always had this attitude of work hard, play hard. And that brought me to Wall Street when I graduated from college. Wall Street, I did okay those first couple of years in investment banking. And let's just caveat this by saying every stereotype you have about the first couple years of investment banking, of not sleeping, of working weekends, of, just not leaving the office, I did all of that. I did that not sleeping thing so well that after 2 years, I got the call to move to Singapore. And shortly after that, the person who brought me to Singapore left. And so at the rightful age of 26, I was on Gilligan's Island, so to speak, with this really cool job of overseeing debt financing for 14 different countries. Basically, anything south of China and east of India fell within this territory, if you will, the exception there being the Philippines. But a very cool job to have when you're 26 years old. That manifested itself more so in terms of travel. Over the next 4 years, I went to 40 different countries. I rarely spent any time in a single time zone. And I didn't sleep very much. From the age of 18 to 30, I slept 4 to 6 hours a night, which we know is probably not a good thing, right? And I thought I was healthy, even despite all of this, right? I thought I was healthy because I was doing what the mainstream media was saying to do. I was, exercising up to 10 times a week, doing crazy things like CrossFit. I was eating whatever the diet du jour was. And then on top of it all, I started getting into this area of quantified self. And so quantified self initially was the question of how to sleep less and work more, which again, that sort of mentality of just work hard, work hard, work hard is something that I've corrected since. But eventually it evolved into lab testing and getting smarter about different biomarkers and getting smarter about just my own body. And so at the age of 30, I decided to leave my job in finance because I thought I did everything that I could possibly want to do in finance, to go start what everybody was doing those days, start to build an app. In the process of serving out my resignation period, I actually went to the doctor and said, let's just order everything because it's covered under my insurance now. And I had the money at the time, so why not? So I ordered everything. One of those was a cardiac CT scan for calcium. I mean, you can get where this is going given what you said earlier, but found out I had heart disease. 5 days later, I'm getting an angiogram, which I didn't need, and was told to take a statin, even though my cholesterol wasn't particularly high. I love our healthcare system globally in the sense that we can do a lot of things very, very well. But if you ask for an alternative in that scenario, a lot of people that I was speaking to didn't recognize the value of lifestyle intervention, diet interventions, etc. And so I thought there was another way, and basically left, instead of starting the app, sought to answer the question how not to die, because I was told by these doctors, hey, for your age, you're at a 95% chance of a cardiac event. It's pretty, threatening. So the podcast actually started as a cheap way for me to get consults from all of these world experts, right? Because you just, at that point, I was just trying to figure out, like, hey, there's obviously something more to this than just cholesterol. What are those something else? And so when you have a platform, as you do, you can reach out to anybody. And a lot of people just want to give their advice to a platform. And it was a way for me to just kind of get through it all and divide and conquer, if you will.
Great. Now, you just seem to have an inquiring mind, and you want to optimize whether you were in finance or health. Was that a nature or a nurture? Or tell me a little bit about that very strong, inquiring Boomer Anderson.
So where did that come from, huh? It's curiosity. I took one of these online surveys recently where it was something that a friend of mine sent to me, and it was just essentially like, what are the things that if you do, these top 3 things, you'll have a very fulfilling day. And the number one thing that came up for me was curiosity. Where did that come from? I would say I was always a curious kid growing up. I was encouraged to be curious by my parents. And whenever they saw that I was interested in something, they fed that fire with gasoline. Early on in my life, before the age of 12, I was very interested in finance. By 12, I was trading my first stock. Had that sort of I had that backing from my parents, where it was just like, hey, if this kid likes something, let him go and do it. The same thing came with health. And so if you look at my 2 core passions, it's finance and health. Health initially was spawned by my grandfather. I never met him because he died of a heart attack. He is morbidly obese. And that was a very big motivator early on in my life. And later on spawned by just a need to perform better in different athletic scenarios. But really that curiosity it came from my parents. My mother was a yoga teacher. She exposed me very early on to Eastern philosophies. So I'm very grateful for them.
Fantastic. And you've gone along a process where you've sort of, mixed those Eastern philosophies, ancestral wisdom principles together with modern science. I do want to hear about the process, how you take clients through the lab tests. I think you've got a 7-step process on your website, from deciding. Just take the listeners through and the viewers through the process of taking a client on.
Sure. I want to break this down in terms of one of my core beliefs for people is, or for optimizing health, is that you need to measure something. There's a quote that gets wrongly attributed to Peter Drucker called "What gets measured gets managed," right? It was actually Lord Byron who may have said it first. Drucker probably had a better PR person, and which is why he gets quoted that all the time. And so what I also core tenet of mine is that we're all individual. And so these broad proclamations that are made to the public that says, hey, this diet is good for all 7 billion people, we just know that's not true, right? If you go on a Katavan diet, which works for certain people in Papua New Guinea, I will get fat. Their diets are largely sweet potato and coconut, right? But for some other people, like the Katavans, they found that they don't really have incidences of heart disease. And so if we take those basic principles that like we're all individual, my belief is that you need a framework to test that. And so when you look at health really and what we're testing for, we look at you as an ecosystem, because after all, you are. At a base level, you have different organisms throughout your body. Even at a cellular level, our cells are made up of a symbiotic relationship between mitochondria and ancient bacteria. The endosymbiotic theory of evolution explains this. But that's not the only symbiotic relationship that we have in our body. The gut, which has been getting a lot of attention as of late, at least for a number of years now, there's a number of different bacteria there. There's bacteria in our skin, there's bacteria in our mouth. That's your microbiome. We have fungi, perhaps the most famous of them all happens to be Candida, which everybody has Candida, but the question is how much do you have and is it an overgrowth or not? And that's called the microbiome. And then we have the virome, which is getting a lot of attention these days. And all of these ohms actually comes together and has a name, and it's called the holobiont. And so you're actually you're not health in terms of diet and exercise, you're health in terms of the health of your organisms. And so in order to measure that, we take people down to the metabolome level. And so metabolomics is essentially the study of where your cells are currently and where they have been. Very recently. And if you think of genetics as kind of the blueprint on where you're going, it's very useful for assigning probabilities of things to happen and perhaps a longer term, flag in the air. But when I initially work with people, I want to know where they are now. And so I'm assessing the metabolome and looking at things like micronutrient deficiencies, perhaps neurotransmitters, toxicities. Mercury is a very common one there. We're looking at antioxidant capacity. We're also looking at a 3-day stool test where we're looking at the balance of that microbiome. Do you have a diverse microbiome? Or are you like me and grew up in the United States where I was pumped with antibiotics very early on in life? And so there's a lot of work that I personally had to do to make my microbiome more diverse. And then we look at food sensitivities, and food sensitivities offer insight into what foods may be causing low-grade inflammation in your body. For me personally, I ate eggs for 5 years straight, and I ate 5 eggs a day. And you can imagine what that does to you when you don't give your body a break. I developed a food sensitivity to it. Now I've taken a break from that, and hopefully someday in the future, just because I love the taste of the food, I would love to be able to reintroduce eggs into my diet. And so that really gives us a framework by which to operate. So what I've done in working with my clients, which you and I discussed this before, are a certain subset of people. I only work with entrepreneurs who are my sort of tagline, if you will, is I work with people who are changing the world and I help them do it through health optimization. And so entrepreneurs and executives are who I work with. That's just because I have some other involvements and I have little time on my hands. And those are the people that I can relate to, just given the background that you heard earlier. But what we do is we have that blueprint. Once we have really an assessment of where you are now, it's easy to plot a course on where to go, what kind of modifications need to be made, what kind of deficiencies need to be addressed. And so that, to me, gives me a framework by which to evaluate all of these biohacking tools and technologies that we talk about and maybe get into today.
Okay, sounds excellent. And sounds like this blueprint is quite extensive. And I think you've obviously tried and tested over many clients and many years, which is incredible. Tell me, how would we translate that to health coaches? I had James Maskell on my show, who wrote The Community Cure. He talks about health advocates, those that can do group visits, because we want to take that blueprint. We want to make it available to more people. And of course, you are doing it with influential leaders, and you're affecting executives and entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs have businesses. They get impacted. Their health gets optimized. They then take their exco and they take their directors and they take their leaders and they can take them through the same process. But tell me your view on health coaching, because my perspective is there's a huge space or chasm between the functional medicine doctor or the doctor and the patient. And often they get a whole series of this blueprint, the doctor's blueprint. They get all the details and they get a whole bunch of supplements and they say, I'll see you in 3 months or 6 months. And many of those patients or clients I've picked up because it's just not a walking of the journey together. So I'd love your perspective on the future of health coaching and the different blueprints around there that you would recommend.
It's a very good question. And I only work with a limited amount of people because of this, because you raise a really good point. There is a ton of value in the analysis in itself, right? You get a lot of information. It's usually presented in a way that you understand it, but oftentimes you get sent away. And there's an element of, how do I implement this? Or how do I get somebody that holds me accountable? And so I think health coaches are an extremely powerful tool, if not the most powerful tool in the entire toolbox, if you will. And why is that? Well, there needs to be somebody who liaises with this person day to day, because it doesn't matter how beautiful the analysis is if you do nothing with it, right? And so at the end of the day, you need somebody that is an instrument in behavior change. And that's, to me, where the health coach comes in. Oftentimes I spend, the reason why I only work with 15 people at a time is because I'm on the phone with these guys almost every single week. There are some exceptions, but it's usually every single week. In rare cases, it's every 2 weeks. And once it goes beyond 2 weeks, there's a risk there that people aren't able to adhere to certain habit changes. Now, here's the traditional issue with habit change, right? It takes time. And so let's go back to that beautiful analysis. Now, I've assessed it where you are, and we know where you need to go. But if I tell you to do it all overnight, there are very few people that can actually get that done. And so what does that titration process look like? What does that micronutrient habit change look like? What does, using the Japanese term Kaizen, look like? And so how do we make that person go 1% better every day? And that's where somebody like a health coach, and maybe there's a role for behavior change coach as well, health coach, habit coach, whatever you want to call them, that's a very crucial aspect to this whole opportunity set that we're talking about today.
Great, well said. And are there health coach academies or institutions that you prefer worldwide? Have you worked with health coaches before? Have you taught them and just shown them the bits and the important parts of your process, of your blueprint, and how they can implement it with clients that possibly firstly can't see you, or they're just not at a time or place or financial level that they can afford you, and they want to work with a local health coach?
So, full disclosure here, I'm involved in a foundation called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And there I serve as essentially our person in Europe. But it was started by my mentor, Dr. Ted Achacoso. And that outlines a lot of what I described earlier in terms of the health of the holobiont. So what we do is we train doctors and practitioners worldwide on this idea of health optimization medicine and practice. Now, let me explain what that means. So traditional medicine, as we think about it, is a brilliant and beautiful thing. If you get shot, you should go to the emergency room. If you have some sort of ailment that is an emergency, yes, go see your doctor. But what health optimization medicine and practice seeks to answer is the question that I had many years ago, where I went to my doctor and said, hey, I feel pretty damn good. Everything says that I'm okay, but I feel like there's something I'm leaving on the table here. And that could be the micronutrient deficiencies that I alluded to earlier. That could be chronobiology. In my case, it almost certainly was, right? 4 to 6 hours a night is not a sufficient enough sleep. That could be your exposome or your environment. That can be looking at your clinical metabolome. It can be epigenetics. It could be so many different things. And what we do is we give doctors and practitioners a framework by which to understand this stuff so that you can go and implement it in your practice. And so that is where, I mean, you can tell a lot by somebody by what they're involved in. And all of my chips, as I went through this process, I'm putting all my chips in that because it's the best framework out there. I was seeking to build a framework myself, and then I met Dr. Ted on my podcast. And afterwards, I'm like, and Dr. Ted's like statistically one of the smartest people in the world, right? And so afterwards, my question to him was, how do I learn from you? And he gave me this invitation, and I went all in because it was something that I was looking for, and it's something that the world needs.
Sounds incredible. I don't know if you've got a branch in South Africa, Boomer.
I don't think we have anybody in South Africa yet, but we can talk a little bit after the show if you want.
Absolutely. I want to move on to top tech tips or health technologies that you recommend. Obviously, tech has its good, has its bad, has its ugly, and how you combine that with ancestral, principles and wisdom, because tech can get out of hand, and orthorexia is a problem. I've seen clients before where they become obsessed with metrics and markers and all the devices. Tell me about your top tech tips and just expand on where it's going.
Sure. And let me make a confession here, because I used to be one of those people where if I woke up and saw my Oura Ring score and it was, let's say, 68 or something, it would ruin my day. And there is a danger there when it comes to quantified self and over quantification, if you will. So let's talk about tech first in terms of the framework by which I use it in my life, and then we'll get into some of the things that I use, and then we can go into where I hope the future is going. So technology should be a tool in the arsenal. It shouldn't be the master of you. And what do I mean by that? You've mentioned earlier ancestral wisdom and diets and nutrition and all that stuff. And that's all very, very important. And getting that framework that I talked about in order by which to determine what's your proper nutrition plan, what is the amount of sleep that you need every night, what are some of the things that we may need to address that are under the hood, the biochemistry, if you will, that can ultimately serve you and take you to the next level. Now, where I use technology is to either create or accelerate feedback loops. And now, what do I mean by that? We talked earlier about that behavior change process. And I believe very much in those Kaizen principles, going 1% better every single day, because most people cannot make a huge jump when it comes to habit change. And so if you are looking for ways to reinforce behavior, technology can be a great tool in that sense. Take, for example, the device that I mentioned earlier, and it's on my finger right now, the Oura Ring. If you want to get somebody to sleep better, by first measuring it, they understand where they are now, and then they can begin to associate certain behaviors with better sleep. So let's talk about wine drinking. When I first started, and you're in South Africa, which has a fantastic wine region, right? Yeah. And so, when I first started operating in this realm, there was an opportunity for me to actually go after the Masters of Wine certification, and I did debate it briefly. I've since then basically cut out all drinking from my life. And part of that was because I was beginning to realize the net effect of drinking on my deep sleep. And so you have more than 2 glasses of wine and go to bed right away, your deep sleep, take a look at it, see what's going to happen. Maybe you're in the few minority where it doesn't really matter, but most people will see some sort of net impact on their deep sleep, and it'll take a number of days to recover. So going back to that feedback loop, that's a negative reinforcement. So now I know that this person, and now I know as this person that if I want to sleep better and feel better, maybe I should reduce or eliminate that wine. And so when you reduce or eliminate that wine, you then look at your Oura Ring and you get that positive feedback loop. Oh, I feel good, and the data says I feel good. So, okay, let's go 1%, 1%, 1%. And pretty soon you're starting to look at almost an exponential curve. All right. So that's one way to use technology. Technology serves as those feedback loops. It certainly helps reinforce behavior change. And in certain instances, it can augment performance or augment certain things. I'm just trying to think of a quick example here. Well, there's two or three. Red light therapies, a big one, right? And so let's say, and this is very common, and one of the reasons why a lot of these red light therapy companies started was because of skin issues. Okay, you can now have red light therapy, and it may be able to address some of your skin issues, things like eczema, etc. That's one reason. Now, if you're also looking at time, so time and technology can be used to leverage time. You can see, maybe you can't see it, but behind me, there's a bike that gives two 20-second sprints. It's called a carol. And over the course of 8 minutes and 40 seconds, I get a complete workout, and it's only two 20-second sprints powered by AI resistance. Now, let's go back to the lens on which I view my health world. It's with a time constraint because all of the people that I serve are time constrained professionals. And so we can use these technologies to still get the bang, if you will, for our buck in terms of health. And so that same goes true with devices like blood flow restriction training. So I use a device called the Be Strong, and that device allows me, when I travel, and I just got back from the US yesterday, it allows me to really put on muscle in very little time spent in any sort of gym.
Excellent. I think those are, having used my Oura Ring now for 18 months and looking at the data, I know what alcohol does at night. So now if I do want a nice single malt whiskey, which I'm a big fan of, and I collect single malts, I have it at lunch because it has less impact on my deep sleep. Well, the photobiomodulation, the infrared sauna, the near incandescent infrared sauna that we've got from Sauna Space, that I'm a big believer.
Oh, I have one right back there.
Oh, incredible. Yeah, we're the South African sole distributors of Sauna Space products, and it's incredible. It helps with deep sleep, and it's been a game changer for me in my sleep. So I think you're right. Technology can serve us as long as we make sure that we can not become overly obsessed with the technology, especially the Oura. I've now done 20,000 miles in the last 25 years of running, or 35,000 kilometers. And I tell you, I look at that Oura sometimes with a little bit more detail than I should, instead of waking up and seeing how I feel. So I think it is intuition. It's understanding how your body works, how you feel, in combination with these tech devices that we've got. Tell me a little bit about the dangers. I know the Oura Ring I'm very happy with because you can put it on sleep mode, and you put it on airplane mode without the non-native electromagnetic fields. Tell me about your view on the damaging sort of Bluetooth devices and Wi-Fi, and just what your view is on these technologies and the radiation that they emit.
So I think of everything through an evolutionary lens, right? And so if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, when was electricity invented? A couple of 100 years ago. We've been on this planet for several thousand years. And during that time, it's only been very recent that our meat suit, if you will, has been exposed to electromagnetic radiation, other than, let's say, Schumann's resonance from the Earth, right? And so with that in mind, there's probably an effect, right? A lot of the studies out there are either with, 10 people or 20 people, or just haven't been really, really conclusive. But let's, again, look at it. I am electromagnetic hypersensitive, by the way. So I personally am one of these people that looks at it and says, okay, there are enough alternatives out there these days to sufficiently protect myself from electromagnetic radiation, or give me alternatives so that I don't need to use Bluetooth headphones. sometimes it's killer because I'm also a technologist, right? Like I want to try the Neura headset, which has this AI programmed, whatever hearing. So you have your individualized hearing. That sounds great, but at the cost of what? And I know that I get headaches if I wear a Bluetooth headset for too long. I know that I get headaches if I'm in a bedroom that has a Wi-Fi router. And so for me, basic principles here. From an evolutionary perspective, we've only been exposed to this for a very short period of time. And so if we're only exposed to this for a very short period of time, what can we do to minimize our exposure? It's impossible to live a modern lifestyle and avoid it entirely. But what can we do to minimize our exposure? And there's basic principles like not using a Bluetooth headset, like turning off your Wi-Fi at night, like maybe even going outside and grounding in the morning. Those basic principles will allow you to operate in this. You don't have to go and live in some remote woods in a random country, although that would be nice. I would love to do that. But at the same time, how do you function in modern society with that? And I think there's some basic principles that I've outlined that you can do.
Great. I think those are practical, they're simple, people can action them straight away. An incredible conversation with Patrick van der Burt from GeoVital and Health Strong hold the company in Australia. I'm a GeoVital consultant, I'm a geobiologist, and I've trained. And so I think I think the more people say this and express this and express the importance of this, hopefully the listeners and the viewers can apply these. A lot of people that I speak to about non-native, electromagnetic radiation think actually no, it's a hoax and there's no studies, and they walk around with Apple earpods in their ears the whole day with their Bluetooth. I think we need to just make the next generation as aware as we can, because I think there are detrimental effects on our health and our performance. So thank you for that. Tell me about the future of tech. Where's it going, Boomer, and what can we be excited about?
This is great because for one of the many hats that I wear, I told you I'm involved in Troscriptions, but also one of the many hats that I wear in this space is one of an investor too. And so when I look at the tech that I'm excited about to see where it goes, obviously there's an AI component here, and I'll come back to that in a second. But let's look at some trends in the health optimization space that I like. Continuous blank measurement. So right now you can get a continuous glucose measurement. Yes, there are issues there with Bluetooth, but when we're talking about a 2-week test to determine whether or not certain foods or drinks, if you will, provide glucose spikes, that could be very useful for people. Now, as we start to get down the rung and say like, hey, the technology is already there, let's try some other biomarkers, whether that be ketones, whether that be, choose your biomarker, if you will, leptin. Well, that would be very interesting. I'm not sure how you'd be able to do that, but these things could be, that's a trend that I am paying attention to. The omics and the cost of testing is something that I think is going to be huge over the next 10 to 20 years. So what I outlined earlier was a way to bio-individualize your health. And so if we look at genetics testing and then microbiome testing as declining at a rate that is greater than Moore's law, all right, so what does that mean for metabolomics testing? What does that mean for the consumer's ability to reach this stuff? So if tests decline enough, now we're talking in a conversation where this isn't just available to the elite, this is available to the mainstream. And it allows you to really kind of filter out that health noise, if you will, and make your own decisions. Now, when we stack that, and this is where I spend a decent amount of time thinking, when you stack that with qualitative surveys, it can become very, very powerful in terms of knowing exactly where to focus. In mathematics, they call it eigenvector centrality, which is a term that, and granted, it's been a while since I've looked at linear algebra, but it's the node in the network by which if it moves, that's how the it determines the network moving, right? And it's actually a calculation that Google runs to determine SEO. But if you think about that in terms of your body and your body as a network, if we're able to calculate that eigenvector centrality, if you will, and then we know what lever to pull on that's going to have the most impact from you. And that comes from a combination of these omics technologies as well as these qualitative surveys. That is very, very powerful and something that I'm super, super excited for. And then I think just in a further advancement on current technologies so that some of our athletic and movement technologies get a little bit better than they are now. Would be really, really exciting to me. And we're talking about stuff that I think can happen in the next 3 to 5 years. We're not talking about stuff that is so far away.
So we're not talking about nanobots in the next 10 years being injected into your vein, repairing your arteries and, removing cancer. Are we there yet?
Well, we can certainly talk about that, right? Like that is all within the scope of possibility because we have a lot of these technologies available to us that didn't exist before. People were conceptualizing these ideas, but they weren't able to execute them. Now we may be able to execute all of them. And so if we're able to execute them, what does that mean for humanity? Maybe we'll live longer. But I think there's still a foundational layer that people need to realize, like, hey, you need to do the work. And if you do the work, when you get to 80 or 90, that life is going to be so much better than if you didn't do the work and you're just kind of, rather than living, you're kind of surviving.
Yeah. Good. I've been listening to David Sinclair, Dave Asprey, and looking at longevity. Are we going to get to the 150 boomer? Are we going to get to the 180? Tell me, what are your thoughts?
So my understanding, and I'm a follower of the longevity space. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm far from it. And I've had conversations with the likes of Aubrey de Grey and a few others. And if you believe the basic principle that aging is a disease, right? Which is a very interesting concept to just think about. So aging as a disease, and if we're able to reverse aging, are we then able to prevent things like cardiovascular disease, basically the 4 horsemen of death, from happening? We don't know yet, but it's so exciting that I want to do everything possible to see if it happens, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that I pay attention to, like biological age, which I test every 6 months on myself, and as well as my clients, that I think is very, very interesting. Now, you asked a question earlier about where are we going to go from here? Are we going to live to 150, 180? Biologically, I think we're programmed to live to 120. Now, what is the extender there? Is it that age reversal that I just talked about in terms of if we're able to reverse biological age, does chronological age then extend? I don't know, but I'm looking forward to finding out. What I'm really excited about in the near term is that concept of health span, which Sinclair talks about, which is basically rather than getting to 60 and falling apart or even 40, what if we got to 80 or 90? Or the map that I like to draw for myself is I want to get to the moment that I'm going to die in as healthy state of as possible and then just drop, and I'm fine there. But if I have any sort of like neurodegenerative disease, terrifies me. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that space. There's a lot of money going into that space. Right now, it's an elite man's game, but I'm hoping that people will be open to other longevity strategies that are less expensive going forward.
Correct. 2 last questions. Your top 3 biohacks for the listeners and the viewers. What are the 3 things that move the needle most for Boomer Anderson?
Number 1 is measurement. And so what gets measured gets managed. And so if you have a particular opportunity or thing you want to fix, identify the marker that you are going to measure that is going to give you a benchmark for success. And so start there. Number 2 is meditation. And this can tell you, again, I'm an open kimono, right? So I've had issues with anxiety my entire life. And it's something that I've had to not battle, but just sort of recognize and deal with. And meditation has made that much, much more manageable. In the sense, in the two benefits that I always like to give people for meditation are, first, that power of pause. And so before I react to something, I have a moment where I'm able to pause and just think about how my reaction is going to be perceived by the other. Doesn't prevent me from getting into arguments all the time, but it does allow me to avoid most of them if I want to. And the second benefit there is meditation allows me to be the general of my day. There are days where I don't meditate, and it makes me feel like I'm the infantryman. I'm just kind of like battling and just sort of throwing stuff left and right. Meditation, when I do it first thing in the morning, sets me up as the general of my day. And then the third thing, and we're talking tactics and tools, right? We're not talking necessarily. I'm just looking around at some of the tactics and tools. So one of the things that, and let me give you two. The first one is going to be a reconnection with nature. So thus far, nothing I've mentioned costs really any money. You can start measuring by an Excel spreadsheet. You can certainly reconnect with nature very easily, and meditation doesn't cost anything either. But reconnecting with nature, the Japanese had this really cool term for it, Shinrin-yoku, I believe was, where they prescribed nature bathing to people who were too stressed out. For me, just getting out there, I live right by a park here in Amsterdam, and just getting out there first thing in the morning is just a great way to center myself and to really just appreciate everything. And then the second one, you can tell me, I can keep rattling these off, by the way. I've got a lot of them.
I'm going to take a deeper dive into your meditation, because I think that's crucial if you're using an app or what type of meditation you do. So just go for it, you know.
Sure. So before I get to meditation, movement, any sort of, just making sure you have movement in your day. When it comes for movement, it does help enhance focus. In most cases, movement will help you increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is probably my favorite gene out there. But think of brain-derived neurotrophic factor among many other things as a method of increasing focus. I do have a movement practice that I spread throughout the day rather than just one condensed movement practice, and that's been very, very helpful. Now, going back to meditation. I use Sam Harris's Waking Up app first thing in the morning, and that I like the way Sam thinks about it. He's a neuroscientist by trade, right? And so if you're on the more nerdy side of things, like I am, Sam Harris is a very good one. I've also tried Headspace, Calm, 10% Happier, and a few others. I like 10% Happier as well. And in fact, Dan Harris, way back, 5-6 years ago, was one of the first people that got me interested in meditation. But I think with meditation, the idea is just start. And so when I started meditating, this is kind of funny, right? I'm not sure if I've ever shared this. When I started meditating, I listened to Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven front to back and just kind of focused on the lyrics that Robert Plant was singing. And the idea is how do I focus, slow down my mind, so I'm not necessarily, maybe not even slow down my mind, but just recognizing where I am in this very space. We can get into so many other things. We haven't even touched on breath work and sunlight. Sunlight is actually one that I probably should have mentioned. Getting sunlight every morning has been profound when it comes to sleep for me.
Okay, incredible. Jack Cruise's work about watching the sunrise and getting morning sunlight that Ben Greenfield, speaks of, not wearing sunglasses. Just maybe expand a bit on that now that we've
we've opened that wormhole. So sun gazing, I believe, is what Jack is a little bit referring to. And so the practice there is you wake up before sunrise, and this is particularly difficult in my part of the world this time of the year, because that's usually like a 4:30 to 5 o'clock wake time. And you go out and you look at the sun. And what does that actually do? You can do this a little bit later. The term sun gazing usually refers to actually looking physically in the sun, which I only recommend doing at certain times during the day. But you can do this a little bit later, and the principle is such. the number one cue for your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your master clock in your body, for syncing your circadian rhythms. And we have many different circadian rhythms, but for this purposes of this conversation, what I'm talking about is the sleep-wake cycle. The number one cue is sunlight. And so when we're looking at how to cue our body's master clock, which has influence over all the other clocks in our body, which can range from leptin to blood glucose to cortisol to a number of others, is sunlight. And so by principle, it's one of the more important things that I do during my day when it's available in Amsterdam, because it's not always available, is to get out and get in the sun and to make sure that ideally I get some in my eyes, but as much of my body as possible. That also helps bring up your vitamin D levels. And vitamin D, when it gets converted into its active form, actually behaves very much like a hormone. And so we can see that play out in many different processes and have many different effects on various genes in the body.
Fantastic. Well summarized and well said. The last question, and you can either give me your 3 principles or hacks or tools. It's a question I ask all my guests. What are the key factors or variables that lead people to sustain their transformation?
Oh, key factors or variables that can help you sustain transformation.
While you're thinking, it's just so many people that I've worked with, they come for weight loss, they do well the first 3 months, maybe even a year. They can't sustain their transformation. 5 years later, they put on all the weight and if not more. And the research shows that numbers between 80 and 95%. Now, why is that? Why do only 5 to 15 or 20% maintain that transformation that they work so hard for, but people battle to maintain?
Sure. This is a very good question, by the way, and I'm going to take maybe a different approach to it. First, before you go down the route of transformation, look at the goal a little bit differently. Look at the goal not in terms of a number, in terms of weight, because I've got family members that have thrown a number out there, they reach it, and as you say, they yo-yo. And usually when they yo-yo, they hit it and they go back worse than they were before, right? And so you don't want to do that. And so let's redefine that goal, not in terms of a number, but how do you feel? What does your life look like? What does it mean to you? And write these things down, because the power of writing it down and continually revisiting and rewriting it is that there's a continual reminder there, and really connect it with that emotion, right? Because once you connect with that emotion and what it means to you, it can be that much more powerful. Now, that's just one general area. I like to tell all of my clients that success is really addictive. And so once you are on that path and you start seeing that 1% improvements, don't be afraid to move the goalpost, right? And once you've gotten to, let's say you started with a body weight goal, okay, that body weight goal may evolve into something else, because this is an onion that you're unpeeling, right? And as a person who's been on this journey my entire life, I can tell you it's very hard to just get to the end of the onion. Evolve the goal, enjoy the journey, because the goal is only one aspect of it, but you got to enjoy what you're doing every day. So find a way to fall in love with the journey. I guess that would be 2.5. And then my third thing that I'm going to offer here is, if it is tough, hire somebody. Because for me, the act of putting money into something means I will actually pay attention to it. But for others, they just need that accountability. They need that reminder. And the coach, the doctor, the practitioner, whomever it is, serves not only as that reminder, but they're checking out your blind spots, right? Because there may be something that you're just not seeing. I had one client who just didn't sleep well for years and years and years, and he couldn't figure out why. And then I made him show me around his bedroom. I work with everybody virtually, right? Show me around his bedroom. And he didn't have any blinds. And it was just like, and he had a street light right there. It's just like, oh, okay, maybe we should throw in some blinds. And boom, fixed. Relatively easy fix, right? Very easy from my perspective. But you need somebody to look at your blind spots. And that's where that coach, that consultant, whomever it is, can come in.
Right. And, Dr. Mark Hyman said that community is the greatest force to bring about change. And you've so succinctly said that your coach, your health advocate, a doctor that walks the journey with you, a health practitioner who can just hold you account and see things that you're not seeing. So, Boomer Anderson, you are an incredible human being that served many, many people, and I've been a recipient of your great work. So I'm, just eternally grateful because I've learned so much from you. Where can people find you? How can people connect with you? Give us your social media handles as well, please.
Sure. So me personally, everything is under the name Decoding Superhuman. So if you go to Instagram, it's Decoding Superhuman, and LinkedIn. Those are the two networks that I spend more of my time on than others. For other involvements, you can check out Troscriptions.com, which is, if you're watching this on video, you'll see that my tongue is blue right now, and that's because of a nootropic called blue carnitine. And then you can check out homehope.org, which is the foundation that I mentioned earlier. So those are the three ways to find me. And really, I would encourage people to say hello, because I do read and respond to every single message. So please say hello. Let me know what you think of the interview. And this has been an absolute pleasure, Steve.
Yeah. And I recommend you go to the Decoding Superhuman Podcast.
Minor detail. I failed to mention the podcast.
Yeah, but I reminded you because, it's been so impactful in my life. So go there, listen, rate, review. It's been a privilege. And, all I can say is that just pour favor upon you and blessing, and that you would grow from strength to strength, that you'd be the world changer that you've caused many other people to become. And so, Boomer Anderson, I wish you all the best. And to my viewers and to the audience that is listening there, as always, I say, be and stay surrounded.